Hello and welcome to this tutorial on physical modeling synthesis. Today we are going to be building some physical modeling synth patches from scratch, starting with the most basic classic patch in Serum, and then ending with a more advanced patch using Max for Live. And if you're not familiar with physical modeling synthesis, it's a really powerful technique that can almost indistinguishably create instruments. Like this piano tech instrument really uses synthesis, no samples behind the scene. Check out how real this sounds. Let's start by making the most basic physical modeled synth patch we can in Serum. So we're going to disable oscillator A, because we don't need oscillators today, baby, just noise. And then we're going to set the noise source to ARP white. Bring the level of that noise all the way down, but then drag envelope 2 onto the level. And then bring envelope 2 sustain to 0%. And drag that decay down to something like 13 milliseconds, really short, and it should sound something like this. Just a click. I do have reverb enabled over here. I guess I could turn that off for now. Yeah, then enable the filter, and let's go down to flanges comb L6 plus. And if you don't know what comb L6 plus is, just wait for the next section because you're going to be an expert on comb L6 plus. Then pass the noise into this filter, click the little keyboard button to enable key tracking, and then turn the resonance all the way up. And then as we play with this low pass frequency, we'll kind of change the timbre of this pluck string instrument. So as you turn the low pass frequency down, it almost becomes more like a palm muted pluck string. And as you turn the low pass up, it becomes more like a bright guitar. And don't get me wrong, this isn't like piano tech level simulation. It is, still like a really basic patch, but it's still a very nice sound. I see artists like Fortet using this a lot in their music. This is called a Car Plus Strong patch. And it can sound really cool. I think almost because it is not realistic, because it definitely still sounds like a synthesizer. It can blend in nicely with electronic music, and if you put in some convolution reverb, it'll even sound more convincing. So what the heck is a comb L6 plus filter, and why does it work at modeling a plucked guitar string? Well, let's try to physically describe what happens when we pluck a guitar string, or in this case a banjo, because it's easier to draw. So we're going to pluck the string, right towards the bridge, and we can represent that pluck as an impulse. You could also represent it as like a burst of noise, or kind of any short burst of energy. And then what's going to happen is this signal is going to propagate down the guitar string, just like if you were holding a jump rope with your friend and you sent a wave towards them. It takes some time for that wave to hit them. And then the string is fixed at the neck, so the wave can't keep propagating. What it's going to do is it's actually going to reflect backwards. And there's a time it takes for this wave to propagate, right? So we're going to represent that as a delay. And that specific time of that delay will determine the pitch of our instrument. But this delay doesn't just happen once, right? It's like a delay with feedback. So this wave will kind of keep going back and forth over time. So we can represent that by feeding the signal back in. But this wave is not just going to keep propagating forever, right? First off, like every time it hits the neck and the bridge of the instrument, it's going to lose some energy, right? It's not like just going to keep sustaining this wave forever. So there's going to be some attenuation, but also just the string is not efficient at sending all frequencies up and down. It can only carry some frequencies. So essentially, we're going to attenuate the upper frequencies. We're going to dampen the wave, and this is going to be our low-pass filter. And specifically in serum, we're going to do a low-pass 6, which means 6 decibels per octave. It's also known as a one-pole filter. It also gets slightly attenuated. We can just say like attenuate. And then this feedback signal goes back into the delay. And that's it. That's our model of what happens in a guitar string, or at least this is kind of the first order model of what happens in a guitar string. But wait a second. If the physical model of a guitar string is a delay with a low-pass filter in the feedback loop, why are we calling this a comb L6 Plus filter? Well, if you remember from my video from a couple weeks ago, what a comb filter actually is under the hood is just a delay. And usually when we call it a comb filter, it's just when the delay time is really small. So since it takes a really short time for a wave to propagate up and down a guitar string, like a couple milliseconds, we call this a comb filter. And a usual comb filter would not have the low-pass filter. But since we need the low-pass filter to better emulate a guitar string, in serum, it's called the comb L6 Plus filter. So outside of the serum world, this comb L6 Plus filter is more commonly known as the Karplus-Strong algorithm. And that is because two guys in the late 80s invented this algorithm as a way to create, relatively good simulations of guitar strings. And since then, people have extended this idea even further. And now it is just more generally known as digital waveguides, where Karplus-Strong or the comb L6 Plus is kind of the simplest, most basic version. But things like piano tech or more other advanced physical model synths take this idea even further. So the first thing we are going to do to make our digital waveguide even better than the Karplus-Strong is to try to model different modes of vibration in our string. So one way the string can vibrate is kind of in this picture shown, like the string would go backwards and forwards. It'd make kind of waves like this. But that's not the only way the string can vibrate. Like we can also draw, this is the neck of our banjo guitar thing. Here's the head. Here's the body. Here's the string, which I'm kind of horribly bending because I'm a bad drawer. But we can also say the wave would go like this, up and down, and make waves. The wave would propagate kind of like that. And apparently, kind of the waveguide that represents this up and down is slightly different than the waveguide that represents this side to side. But they kind of interact with each other, so you don't just have two serum patches in parallel with slightly different parameters. You actually want these waveguides to interact. So how we're going to do that is we're going to have the first delay. We're going to have the low pass 6 plus, and then we're going to have another delay with a slightly different time, and another low pass. And then these are going to combine down here, and then they're both going to feed back together. And this is different than having two serum patches in parallel, because this is in the feedback loop that they're combining versus just at like kind of like the final output. So that, like in the serum, like this, if you just had two serum patches in parallel, like you would never have feedback, because like this would all be in one patch. You couldn't have one patch feedback into the input of another patch's filter. But in Max for Live, we're going to build this where we can have the filters feedback into each other. And we're actually going to also implement a third one just because some paper I was reading said that 3 waveguides can accurately simulate a stringed instrument. All right, I hope the theoretical stuff made sense. Let's move on to implementing that more advanced waveguide with Max for Live. And I'll give a link in the description to download this more advanced waveguide patch so you don't have to worry about recreating all these details from scratch. That would just be way too long of a video if we went through every single part of building this scratch. So you can click that little rectangle to open up the Max for Live editor, then click this little yellow button to go into patching mode and see what this patch is made of. So this entire top of the patch is just about giving a burst of energy, similar to how in Serum we had a really small burst of white noise. If I double click and type plug out with the tilde, we can create another output and listen to what this sampler sounds like in Ableton. So it's just a burst of noise. You can drop different samples on, and it will, if we play around with that at the end of the video, you can get very different timbres by putting in just different types of sample. So that's what's going on upstairs in this patch. We can reconnect that impulse into what's called the triple waveguide. And the triple waveguide has a couple inputs, so we can control the cutoff frequency of all the filters. There's also something to just convert the frequency into a delay time, what's also known as a period. So we're just going to divide the MIDI to frequency by 1,000 so that we get the delay time in milliseconds. And we're also going to get a control to have the feedback of the signal. And this just goes essentially between 0% and 99.99%. And then we want to take a look what's going on inside of this triple waveguide patcher, which is where the magic happens. Okay, so it looks kind of messy. I tried my best to clean this up, but it's just the nature of having a bunch of feedback paths and having a bunch of things in parallel. It looks kind of messy. Sorry about that. But anyway, so what these waveguides are is it's what we talked about in the theoretical section. It's just a delay with a filter. And I have the feedback going on outside so that I can combine the signals before the filter feeds back into the delay. So yeah, these little inlets just pass on this 2 inlet passes the delay time, which controls the pitch. And this 3 inlet controls the filter frequency, which controls the timbre of the guitar string. And then, yes, same way, like paralleled outside, these little inlets just bring in the cutoff frequency and the pitch from outside, and this little 4 inlet controls the feedback. So each little waveguide combines together. The first 2 waveguides are this is the kind of original pitch from our MIDI. The pitch for this one gets scaled by like 0.995, so it's just a slightly different pitch. And this other waveguide is scaled, the pitch gets scaled by 0.5. And since the pitch is in terms of time, it's a period, not a frequency. And so having the period actually increases the pitch by 2, because period and frequency have an inverse relationship. So then, yeah, they get combined down here. These 2 waveguides, which represent kind of like the side-to-side motion of the string and the up and down motion, they get an amplitude of almost half, 0.49, whereas the second harmonic, the higher pitch, that gets an amplitude of 0.02. So those all get combined together and fed back into the input, and that's how you get a slightly more realistic waveguide. Outside of that patch, it just goes to another gain and finally into our output. Altogether, sounds like this. And you can get quite different tones by just playing with the sample that goes into. So yeah, those are all just stimulating the same filter with slightly different transients. And I'll go back over here. This impulse I was using at the beginning is taken from the short section of the beginning of someone plucking a guitar. And this one, it's pretty tinny. I think that was when I was playing around with the amount of mixing of each of the parallel waveguides. If we were to mess with these parameters, like let's make this half of the amount for the second harmonic, and then we would want to increase the amount of feedback for the others, we could get a little deeper string. I'll also mention, it sounds nice with convolution reverb on the output, just to make it a little more realistic. All right, well, that plucky little string instrument was pretty fun to make, and I think I could take the patch further, but I'll stop the video here for right now. I do plan on continuing to dive deeper into physical modeling synths and making a part 2 for this video. So let me know what you'd be most interested in seeing. I could either make this patch more from scratch if that's really of interest to see like all the details of making a Max for Live patch. I could look at other types of instruments to physically model, like brass or woodwinds. Or I could just take this string instrument even further. There's a lot of cool papers out there where people just share their secrets of how to make these things realistic. Like one interesting thing I've seen is using convolution to model the body of the guitar and then feeding that back in with all the other waveguides. So you just have this system that's like resonating, just like a real instrument, which could be really cool. That's probably the direction I'm most leaning towards for part 2. But let me know what you're thinking. And I also just wanted to share some other thoughts about why I'm diving so deep into physical modeling. I think part of it is creating realistic instruments is cool, it's challenging, and it's interesting. And it has some use cases, right? Because like sampled instruments, while they sound exactly like a real instrument because they're real recordings, there's kind of some problems of expression in sampled instrument libraries. Like when you're trying to play, say, a brass instrument and you want it to kind of trill just like a real brass player would, add that vibrato to it. It's hard to get that in a sampled instrument because when you're kind of like crossfading between all these samples, it doesn't quite sound like a real player fluidly opening up the expression of their instrument. So I think physical modeling does offer promise and tackling those like fluid expressions. Now controlling that is a whole other question. Like we probably need more advanced MIDI controllers, at the very least the like Aftertouch or XYZ controllers to be able to have access to all those cool parameters. But I think that's a really cool direction to take it. But that's just one direction. The other direction I think that's really cool to take this is not trying to model physical instruments, but just using these concepts and pushing them to their limits so that we can invent new types of sounds. And I think that that's very possible for this type of synthesis to like hit new territory. It's kind of reminding me of FM synthesis a couple decades ago, where, like originally FM synths like the Yamaha DX7, what they were probably most used for was like a cheap replacement for a upright piano. Like I think a lot of bands pre 80s, you would tour around with, real upright pianos, or maybe even a Rhodes or something. I don't know. But, you'd have these big, heavy instruments, and then all of a sudden the DX7 comes around, and you can get a sort of okay sounding keyboard sound in a much smaller package that's easy to tour around with. But that's, compared to today's standards, that's a really pedestrian use case for FM synth. Like dubstep producers, drum and bass producers, all these bass music producers, among other types of music, have really pushed FM synthesis to its limits. And FM is now like a fundamental tool for really complex sound design. I think that digital waveguides have potential for that. Like, it's just kind of mirroring that FM case where Currently, it's mostly used for kind of realistically recreating instruments, and it's doing a really good job of it. I think Piano Tech is probably better than a sampled piano, but does it have other use cases beyond that? I guess time will tell. Like I've seen some instruments that do cool stuff with resonating banks and like waveguides, so I guess people are already kind of doing that. But I think that the limits could be pushed further. So I'm hoping those of you watching this and taking the time to kind of dive deep into the details with me, I hope you get some really cool ideas from this and try pushing it to the limits. If you do have any ideas of creative applications for this, definitely let me know. I'm super interested in this topic right now. All right, that's it for today. Please like and subscribe if this video is helpful for you, and I'll see you next time.